Okay, hey guys, welcome to my channel. I am Thembelihle and today I have a panel discussion. We are joined today by Busisiwe Deyi, Jade, Trueman, Ngcai, and of course myself.
Men and the concept of the friend zone. Friendships that you have with men, they're always trying to graduate out of the friendship. So it's almost impossible to have genuine friendships with men. Even really close friendships that I have with men in my life, I know on any day they could ask me for news. And it's like you never know how to play or how to navigate friendships. And I think part of our identity, and Busi spoke about this, part of our identity as cishet women is to prepare ourselves for the choosing of men. That's our entire life's work. And I was talking about how I've never had a boyfriend. And I was reflecting on how successful I was, successful I am, great family, wonderful friends, but I still felt unaccomplished. I still was like, okay, I just need to be picked by a man and then I'm done. You know what I mean? And that's the, I don't know, that's the burden for cishet women, is that without that validation, without being chosen, anything that you do is pale in comparison. It's almost like you graduating or people recognize you once you've been chosen. And I talked about how difficult it is to decenter men, particularly as a disabled woman who's never been chosen. I talked about how sometimes I feel like the people who are able to say decenter men are people who have already been chosen and seeing that maybe this isn't it after all. But for those of us who've never been within that and thought everything that I longed for, I'm still longing for within this relationship, within this, system of being picked. So maybe this isn't actually the end and be all. And I just don't know what it will take for us to relinquish wanting to be chosen versus wanting to be chosen and then realizing maybe we don't want to be chosen and that we should take a different route rather.
Yeah, I think for me, when I say this is based on heterosexuality, I don't mean that do not recognize that fundamentally what is powerful about heterosexuality is the idea of being desirable, or the idea that your desirability rather also opens access to other forms of socio-economic advantage. So when I say that, I understand fully that it is, but also I speak from a position where, by the virtue of my attraction, I've already sort of like that job. I'm not desirable in that aspect, right? But I think that also it's asking hard questions of ourselves. Why it is that I have become the unchosen, right? And why that the love and the desire from this particular person. You have parents, you have siblings, you have friends that love you and cherish you. Why is that their desire for you to exist in this world and flourish is not enough? And that takes understanding how centering men in our ideas of what looks desirable is part and parcel of heterosexist capitalist society, that men are seen as the providers of not only protection but also economic mobility, attainment of respectability, a ladder into then people will start respecting you more.
Absolutely.
They won't be like, oh, this person is disabled, but oh, this person is married. And you'll find that they'll actually be very congratulatory of your potential husband.
Absolutely.
Oh, but now,
you've done
he's so brave.
Absolutely.
It's like, no, he likes to have sex with me. That's all he needed to do. He didn't do it. There was no bravery, there naive
Yeah.
to the kinds of sacrifices that a lot of people that are not in my position would have to make, and that's emotionally taxing. That's financially taxing.
Yeah.
That is saying I am okay with being excluded from the system.
Yeah.
I know that more opportunities might be more available. I
Yeah.
don't know it on a conscious level. But like more opportunities would be available. People would respect you more. People
Yeah.
would treat you in a manner that says, this is so-and-so's wife, therefore I must act accordingly, right? They won't, your disability doesn't become the primary point of them understanding you and your identity, you know? So I think it's very difficult. And I think that's why we struggle so much with it, because it's like, what do you mean that we have to? We're also like, I'm queer, so
Yeah.
I'm not invested in this conversation.
Yeah.
Disinvest, disinvest now.
I mean, like structurally for me, like with my childhood, I was exposed to a very heteronormative space, right? And also stepping out of like my cultural or familial bounds. My mother always used to say, "Don't you dare ever get married for love. You marry for a financial partnership." And so but she's also stepped out of the bounds because we're from a colored community. It was never an okay thing to marry outside of your race or outside of your religious beliefs. And so she's married to a black foreign man who happens to be Catholic. We're like a different denomination of Christianity, but it was a taboo. So as much as she had steered me on this like, never ever marry for this and that, she also did. Like there was a certain reclamation of occupying a specific space, but it was also structurally an economic a goal for her. One, to be coupled with a very progressive black man who happened to not be from here, so he was different, and so that gave them more of like a stance of why it's more valid than not. And for him, it was the same. Like he's marrying a fair-skinned colored woman, so that kind of takes him out of a certain kind of bracket as well. So I was exposed to this kind of rhetorical logic in my household, and I was like, I don't want any of this, actually. Good for you. And I mean, I'm still struggling with unlearning that, you know. And back to your point around platonic love and the choosing of that, my grandmother always used to say, you need to marry someone who you'll be able to talk to and talk with for the rest of your life. Not just marry because we get structurally we get the investment in one another and what progression looks like. But for me, progression looks like being able to have a conversation with my partner or partners and being able to move forward from that point onward. And I'm the rebellion. I'm, I would say the child that chose other. And I think that my queerness has been the greatest gift to me, to myself, for myself, because it's opened up a channel of being steadfast in understanding the importance of other and being confident in not fitting the narrative of heteronormative life. Because it doesn't suit me. I don't like it at all. My queerness and my intentional choosing every day to be myself is the greatest gift that I've been able to give myself and the people that I surround myself with. And so that's where platonic love comes in. It's also very intentional and it's pure. So I am absolutely a firm believer in platonic love and the support systems that come from it. It interrogates and it exposes the life of constant unlearning and creation, which is which is something that I think that heteronormative spaces don't allow. It's just not part of the checklist.
You always have a perspective why.
And so it's hard. It's hard to step into yourself every day and to choose yourself. Because, I mean, who wants to have a difficult life truly? No one does, you know? And so when people ask me, like, why did you choose to be who you are? Y'all think it's that simple? That didn't make my life very
difficult.
And I'm just like, how? Why? It comes from a point beyond that. And so, in the same breath, that's how I view platonic love as well. It's from a place of purity where you cannot escape yourself. You find yourself in those spaces. And so the idea of chosen family and chosen love and intentional existence, I would choose a hard life over an easy life any day. Because that space allows me to be pure with myself. Yeah. Like I can't, there's nothing I would choose, I hate this thing of like us, I don't know, creating a fantasy or idealization around hardship and struggle. Why do we always have to navigate spaces of struggle before we reach a goal? I simply just want to be able to, yes, fine, do the work now to create a blueprint so that whoever else is following me can have an easier time doing it.
Yeah.
But the struggle is not something that's gonna like stop me from being pure with myself. Like it's, no.
I think, can I just ask a very pointed question? I mean, as we're talking, I'm thinking, how does loving you as a black woman? So I think also we have to be intentional about the language we use. Like, we are loving each other. And what does loving you look like? Because I think that in most of my work, when I think about loving women who are not or do not have the privileges that I do, it's almost sort of like maternalistic. Let me nurture you, let me, but how does loving you look like? If we are to create a safe space, I think a much more pointed question, and I don't want to put you on this point, you're like, oh my gosh, but like, what does that look like to you? Is it like, just throw the money at me, I just need to be able to open doors. What does opening doors look like for you?
Even literally.
It could be, I just want you guys to be aware that I need somebody to walk ahead of me and open a door. And I don't see that as condescending.
Yeah.
But I think that part of loving each other is asking each other this question: what does loving each other look like? In a very direct way, in a very practical way. What does softness from us look like? And I know you cannot speak for the whole spectrum of women who live with disabilities, but I do think that it's much more, it can be as simple as, what does it look like? And I don't think we've actually had that conversation when I'm just like, what does loving you look like?
Yeah, I was saying to Thembi earlier that one of the things that I love about my personal assistant now, her and I have been together for 2 years, and we've had to find each other in that 2 years on and off. I've had a difficult time accepting the disability, and sometimes that impacts the support that people can give you. And even if you have the greatest support, without that acceptance inward, you find yourself really antagonistic. But what I'm saying I love about my personal assistant is that if I try to reach for Jade's glass right now, she knows that I can't do it, but she'll allow me to do it. She'll allow me to do the things that she knows I cannot do without stepping ahead of me. And then when I'm stuck, she comes in. She doesn't come in with but you knew you were never going to reach the glass. She's still genuinely supportive. So I think part of it is allowing disabled women, or allowing myself rather, to live my life the way that I see fit without prescribing based on what you think or the best decisions are for me. One of the things people are guilty of is making decisions on behalf of disabled people. People I've had in restaurants will be sitting like this as friends, and the waiter will ask you, what would I like to eat? You know what I mean? And it's an opportunity for you as friends to say, I think you should
That's the right person.
ask her. And my family does that really well. My family all look at me and say, no, she'll be telling you all our orders. So they kind of validate me or uplift me in spaces where people have a tendency to reduce me to just the disability. When we talked about nurturing, I think with disability, it's a thin line between nurturing and infantilizing.
I think that's where I was going. It was a tendency to infantilize.
Yes, and I think it's difficult to strike that balance, because when I try to describe to people what it's like looking after me, I try not to make it seem as if I'm helpless. I think it's important to understand that we do have agency. Even if I'm independent now, I drive myself, but even if somebody was turning me in bed every single day, I still have agency. Even if I was bedridden, I still have agency, and it's important to recognize that in anything that you do when you're trying to nurture a disabled person. You're not just prescribing what you think is best for them and so forth. So for me, I think that's what love is. It's being validated. It's people amplifying my voice instead of speaking on my behalf. And it's, I think, just walking into a restaurant, for instance, and saying, sorry, can I ask, how do disabled people or people in wheelchairs access your restaurant? Even if I'm not there, it's that constantly thinking, how would somebody else who isn't in the same privileged space that I'm in access something so basic or something so not powerful? You know what I mean? It's thinking about each other even when we are absent.
Oh yeah, that's powerful. Yeah.
And can I just bring it back, because the reason for this conversation was, I love how you said it, Busisiwe. How does loving you look like? This single mom on Twitter described in detail how she believes her friends should love her. And it was, in my opinion, not prescriptions, but rather suggestions. And it was in a myriad of ways, from a financial perspective, time, resources. And for her in particular, as you know, a single mother who is, let me just assume, from a class background that is not necessarily rich, she was saying to my childless friends, this is what you can do for me. And that created a conversation of entitlement, you this, you that. And it also zoomed in on young women, black women who are somewhat mobile within the class structure, who can afford certain things, and zoomed in on them to say, why are we always burdened? You know, why are the consequences of our community always, thrust upon us? And it made me really want to think about how can we love each other. We already know that our community fails us. We already know that we do not have the privileges that other people have. And how do we turn towards each other and show each other love in ways that are definitive, ways that are practical? How do I say, this is how you love me?
So that, I saw that conversation and I was like, so it's interconnected with like so many things for me. It's interconnected with ideas about the individualization of struggle.
Yes.
The idea that, oh, you chose to have kids, so it's your problem. But also this aspiration to soft lifeness, which is a very capitalist aspiration, right? I am against soft lifeness because it really disallows the potential to engage in community. Because if we understood ourselves as actually existing in community, we would know that the things she's asking are not directed to one person. They're directed to a community.
Yeah.
So 1,000 rand is actually 200, 200, 200, right? So the ways in which we form structures of support, the ways in which we are supported, and the ways that we deliberately engage in solidarity, and for me it's weird, sorry this is an aside, but it's weird how we consider feminism as this individualistic thing. Feminism, particularly, well, when we speak about the people that we speak about, bell hooks, Audre Lorde, they started their publishing houses in each other's kitchens. They would cook for each other, nourish each other, talk about, oh, I have this idea, I have this theory, let's engage with it. Because they understood that the knowledge, and that's why Kimberly Crenshaw has been hesitant to be the owner of intersectionality. Because she knows that Patricia Hill Collins was expanding on it. Angela Davis speaks about it in the 1980s already. But she doesn't call it intersectionality. So these ideas are communal because they formed communities. And I think that's what South Africa capitalism, stole from us, is the ability for me to be like, Thembi, I just need to talk to you. And that resources is not monetary, but is rather, oh, I just need to have a conversation. I need 1,000 rand. Okay, I'll talk to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. But because we've been disallowed the ability to form these networks of community, that 1,000 rand sits no one. So that conversation was so silly because I was like, but we could come together as friends, even if it's a papa's a wine. That will last her a week, 2 weeks. I don't have children. It might be 2 days for those things.
But I mean, look, capitalism is built on the fact that you need to be individually efficient and sufficient and everything. It builds on you being isolated from everybody else, right? That is the theory behind capitalism, and we see it happening right now. I mean, it plays out everywhere. We live a very separated life. Even amongst ourselves, It's like, oh, the inconvenience of we have to schedule each other. We have to. I mean, which we find advantages within now and not. But what I wanted to raise was the again, walking the line between, I hear you with the aspect of why you don't necessarily accept the idea of softness. But how are we defining softness then? Right? Is there a space that exists again between soft life and hard life? Is there a space? Does it have to be separate? I'm coming from a point where I accept softness, I think, in my own way. That isn't necessarily related to how we view softness according to social media, right? For instance, a soft life for me means that I go out every day or every other day and I plant seedlings, or plant seeds, right? I go out into a field where there happen to be bees, or I go into the kitchen and I take whatever remnants of old fruit that may be in the fridge and I delicately place or intentionally place fruit that's about to, die into a pot, and I pour myself, a pot of tea. Softness exists on a spectrum for me as well. It doesn't necessarily, for me, mean accessing expensive furniture to furnish my home, or running a bath, like if I'm using a Vascom, for instance, I can also delicately place like flowers that I've maybe picked up along the way and like fill that in with like lukewarm water and still make it soft for me. I don't know if this is problematic at all. Please do tell me. But there is a gentleness in choosing self and other outside of self, and I feel like there's space for those things to coexist outside of, I think, the narrative that's being like just thrown in our face. Like I absolutely understand. Like we've been like there's this thing on social media of what soft life is supposed to look like. But I think just because I've always maybe because I've always viewed myself as other, like I've also engaged with things outside of what has been like thrown in my face, and I get there's the pressure aspect of like what other people view as soft, but what does softness mean for you, and how are you fulfilling it then? And I feel like there's place for it to be valid in every aspect. But again, just like how we're asking the question around like, what does it look like to love you or love yourself? What does softness look like to you? Yeah.
I think it's important to not co-opt, like for instance, there are a lot of radical notions that have come across or that have come by, like things about radical self-love and self-care, that have been penned by the Audre Lords. Then somehow they trickle into Pinterest and they've been used. Radical self-care, self-love, being a very progressive and radical thoughts, but then somehow being co-opted by white women, also however you may see it. And I think it's the same thing with like soft life. Like no one actually made a movement out of it, but somehow we are intellectualizing it, and this is where we are now. But I also believe that it does have close ties to what Audre Lorde would speak about with self-care and radical self-love being a form of being progressive in a sense, or being radical. And a lot of the time there's always this rhetoric around black women living soft lives. There's a reason why that exists. And I think it's important for us to differentiate between, are we becoming those terrorists in wanting the soft life? Who are we oppressing in wanting the soft life? And I mean, we can really localize it in terms of like the Hoxha race. There's certain people that we aspire towards on social media, those spaces that they take up because they do see themselves as the soft life kind of ambassadors. And it's not a coincidence that this soft life is associated to certain people, but on the back end, people are dying of asbestos poisoning. People are, without certain things. Like it's no coincidence that these things are occurring at the same time. And we can reimagine and rethink soft living for ourselves, but at the crux of it, does a soft life, can we all have a soft life? Like, can we all?
It goes back to the very first question, literally, just around like power structures, like who's going to be serving who at the
we all are.
If we're all
I think who's being exploited.
It's exactly that.
Because I think what Jade speaks about in terms of soft life, I think that it's sort of like the opposite. It's disengaging from capitalist notions of what looks soft, right? And I think that, so I think I understand why black women particularly have gravitated towards the soft life. They've gravitated towards the anti-aesthetic, right? Because we, for the longest time, were actually, our mothers were the service labor of apartheid of capitalism, right? Our role was in the kitchen, in the white woman's kitchen, a nurse or some sort of service person, right? And so being part of the soft life was part of aspirational to say, my body, and I understand how it can be read as liberation, my body as a black woman's body, and read as a black woman, deserves to exist in softness, deserves kindness, deserves gentleness, deserves luxury. And I understand that completely. But I think that at the same time, we can also hold the truth to that if that softness is at the consequence of recreating those very mechanisms that kept us as service of labor, then that's not a soft life. That is just us moving into positions of our oppressors, right? And so, soft life for me, perhaps the question looks like having my friends. It looks like developing a very sustainable relationship that looks healthy, that looks fulfilling. It looks like having lunch once in a while with my friends. It might be at an expensive place, but we have the ability to tip generously and be kind to the waitress or the waiters. It looks like engaging in activism that inspires us and that changes the world. It looks like supporting each other, uplifting each other. It looks like me reading, it looks like, I said to my friends, put me as a reference. We've never worked together, we'll work something out. It looks like finding those chinks in the systems that we can exploit. It means me being a reference. I have never worked with you, but I can say something really wonderful about you. Because of the positions that I hold, it's recognizing my privilege and using it to uplift, and for us to form a soft landing for each other. So if Thembi or Jade has a difficult 6-month patch, we can all collectively come together and say, let's help. Let's have stockpiles of soft life.
Yeah.
It's coming together on an emergence fund for each other. If you lose your job, you can take from that. It's using those mechanisms our mothers, our grandmothers have always used to try and negotiate capitalism. It's not changing the world, but it's using what we had, our kitchens, our children, our houses, our yards, what we have, to offer each other the opportunity for safety, for comfort, for compassion, for all of those nice things. That's soft life for me.
Thembi, I see you like friends writing.
Oh, just as I was listening, I wanted to ask, you were talking about responsibility and the responsibility that we have. How can we mainstream a soft life that isn't exploited?
Yeah.
You've seen like the auntie challenger, she goes to the rural areas, she's there with Louis Vuitton bags. How can we say to our rural communities, you can have a soft life that is like a tendering to the garden? When you arrive in a German vehicle, how can we make it aspirational and ask them to choose a soft life that isn't rooted in capitalism when we ourselves have soft lives that are rooted in capitalism?
Yeah.
So how can you tell somebody just doing nail polish on Sunday is soft life, but you there in acrylic and like a mini Betty? So how do we mainstream saying to people soft life doesn't have to be exploited when we ourselves are guilty of that?
I think you just disinvest from it. This is, weird for me because for a long time, a year, I was unemployed. And then I started working and not only working, but like recognized like at levels that I didn't think were possible. And all of a sudden that gave me access to monetary sort of like payment for my labor, right? And I've always been a person who is sort of like anti-cars, anti-this, anti-that. And so at some point I had the means available to do all of that. And I was like, nothing fundamentally has changed about me. Like, other than my ability to buy whatever bag that costs a lot and I don't need it, other than my ability to buy whatever car, I don't need it. And then how then do we re-divert that? I think it goes back to fundamentally questioning what beauty looks like for us, what affluence looks like for us. I mean, besides the fact that I don't have a driver's license, I don't think even if that I had one, I would buy a very expensive car. And I understand why as black people want to have access to those things, as black women want to have access to those things. But I think questioning what we find as valuable, I don't think you need your Louis Vuitton bags as lali. I mean, besides a high-ace car, you don't need a BMW. It's like, do you know how low BMW is to be going on So I think sometimes we often want to show affluence to the very people that you can aspire from a place of, rather than what do you aspire? Oh, I aspire by, small. That is valid. And how can you make that possible?
The next segue is about black tax and gay tax and disabled tax. And honestly, it's literally this conversation we've had about the rich auntie that comes to the Nallies and she's aspirational and she holds, this kind of position. And I want us to look at it or engage with this from a perspective of as us, like with our chosen communities, because I believe that there's a big difference between philanthropy, which can be highly problematic, and like a lot of the time that is the position that the rich aunt holds, where she's just giving out wads of cash, whereas when we say as these kinds of marginalized people be embedded in these communities, now how do we look at black tax from a more structural point of view, or from a more, I need to help out my friend who is a single mother, or I need to help out this person who needs this. We're all perceived as if we are in the same class bracket, we're all perceived as if we are like within the same age, but now that we've got this chosen community, what does it mean to apply that notion of black tax? Because we understand the validity of it. What does it mean for us to apply those ideas, like as a queer person, as a disabled person, who has access to this much money, or you work and you can do certain things for people who are in your community. What does that look like for us? And do we think that it's something that we can navigate without being paternalistic? Do we have a responsibility to do things like that, or is it just simply like, nah, miss me, I'm not interested?
I moved to East London after my diagnosis to be closer to my doctors, and in the process I gained opportunities, and my life would look very, very differently if I had never left. And now when I go back home once a year, my paying it forward is obviously practical, like wheelchairs, the fixing of wheelchairs within the community that I live, but it's also a referral to the next clinic. Have your body checked out. There is a place that does cushions for wheelchairs and that in this town nearby, but it's not sustainable because I'm not there for the rest of the year. So what happens when I am in East London? And I've thought about myself and the position that I have, the job that I have. I myself am not really listened to. So if I advocate for people who are not there at that moment, people ask, okay, but what do you care? You've made it. Already I think people have a difficult time listening to disabled people asking for services when you're advocating for yourself, let alone advocating for someone who's not there. So I think it's very difficult in the disability lens to create sustainable interventions personally because it is so systematic. You can only give or only refurbish wheelchairs in as far as, but it's about access to healthcare. And if the healthcare system continues to be ableist, whether or not you're in a modern, whether you're in a metropolitan or rural community, there's really no way to make change in people's lives. So I'm still trying to figure out how to do that.
I feel like black tax is the result of a failed post-democratic, post-apartheid country. The things that we call black tax are things that education, access to healthcare, access to housing. I think that those are state functions. And so because we have the levels of failure in state provision that citizens are entitled to, like housing should not be a privilege, it's a right. Education is not a privilege, it's a right. Healthcare is not a privilege, it's a right. All of these things are the result of systemically failed state institutions, right? And it's very problematic when we individualize it. When we talk about black tax, it's like, no, it's not about you.
Yeah.
Then let's be able to identify that actually me giving just to my family is not the root of the problem. The problem is that my family does not have the ability to access education, access healthcare, access adequate housing. Yes, we can talk about parents' demands for a double story or what. Okay, that's a different. If we had those things in place, then we could have a double story, because now I need this, right? So I think that when we talk about black tax, it's a very narrow way of not seeing systemic state institutional failures around education, around healthcare provision, around childcare. In South Africa we still have 6 months, 4 months of paid maternity leave, 6 months. If you want to do 6 months, the last 2 are unpaid. We still have issues around SASSA grant. People are disputing whether people should be receiving grants for children, grants for the elderly, and grants for the
It's in our constitution. It's in our constitution.
What do you mean? This is those, so I think that when we talk about black tax, I'd like us to have a conversation about institutional issues. So I think the conversation on black tax is so limited because it individualizes a very historical and systemic and structural issue.
I think it's safe to conclude that in conceptualizing this conversation, I thought that we would speak about how we as Black women, queer women, disabled women can huddle together in the storm of, the world and what it does against our bodies and what it does to us. But the issue still remains at a very structural level from a very institutional and systemic point of view. I hope that this conversation inspires the urge and the immediacy to build communities, because it is still very relevant, it is still very needed and necessary. But I don't want us to leave here feeling like the burden is now on our shoulders to fix everything. But we can rest in knowing that we are safe and we can be loved in ways in which we can express and articulate without feeling judged, without the need of people saying that we are entitled. Because in my opinion, you guys are all doing a lot in your respective fields, paving the way, advocating for very serious things. And I'm sure some of those things have risen because the people at home don't necessarily know who you are. But like when we came into this conversation, I was quite deliberate about who I wanted to be here. And I appreciate it so much that you managed to come. So it's a huge thank you from me. And I think it's a wrap. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe.